A 5-year-old girl disappeared from a quiet street in broad daylight. What happened next would trigger the largest search operation in British history and uncover a truth so horrifying, it would change a nation forever. Before we go any further, I need 3 things from you. First, hit that subscribe button right now. Second, turn on your notifications so you never miss a case. And third, leave a comment below telling us which cold case we should investigate next. Your support is what keeps Cold Case Crimelab going, and we don't take that lightly. The evening of October 1, 2012, started like any other in the small Welsh town of Machynlleth. Children played in the streets as the autumn sun began to set behind the rolling hills that surrounded this close-knit community. Parents prepared dinner in their modest homes. The community of just over 2,000 residents went about their quiet routines, unaware that within hours, their peaceful town would become the center of a nightmare that would grip an entire nation. In a matter of minutes, everything changed. A little girl would vanish. A community would be torn apart. And an entire country would be forced to confront the darkest corners of human nature. This is the case of April Jones. Welcome to Cold Case Crimelab, where we examine the investigations that changed everything. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most heartbreaking and disturbing cases in British criminal history. This is a story about a small town, a precious life cut short, and a search for answers that would captivate millions. April Sulin Jones came into this world fighting. Born on April 4, 2007, in the small Welsh town of Machynlleth, she arrived 7 weeks premature. Her birth weight was just 4 pounds, 2 ounces. She spent her first 2 weeks in intensive care, where her parents, Coral and Paul Jones, kept vigil beside her incubator, praying their tiny daughter would survive. But April's struggles didn't end there. She suffered a fit as a newborn, and doctors discovered a hole in her heart along with a heart murmur. The medical team warned her parents that their daughter faced a difficult road ahead. But April was stronger than anyone could have imagined. From day one, this little girl was a fighter. As April grew, she defied every expectation. The hole in her heart eventually closed on its own. Her health stabilized. She developed into a bright, spirited child with an infectious smile that could light up any room. Her parents watched in amazement as their premature baby transformed into a vibrant, loving little girl who adored life. April had a special bond with her older sister, Jasmine, who was 16 years old in 2012. Jasmine doted on her little sister, often playing games with her and helping to care for her. The two were inseparable. April also had an older brother, Harley, who was 17 at the time. The Jones family was tight-knit, living in a modest home on the Bryn Wygog estate in Machynlleth. Machynlleth itself is a market town in Powys, Wales, situated in the Dye Valley. With a population hovering around 2,100 residents, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Children play freely in the streets. Neighbors look out for one another. It's a community where parents feel safe letting their kids ride bikes and play outside until dusk. The town has a rich history dating back centuries. It was once considered the ancient capital of Wales and features stunning Victorian architecture alongside its natural beauty. Surrounded by mountains and forests, Machynlleth attracts tourists who come for the hiking trails and peaceful countryside. But for residents, it's simply home, a quiet refuge from the chaos of modern life. April attended Ysgol Gynradd Machynlleth, the local primary school. She was in year 1, just starting her educational journey. Her teachers described her as a sweet child who loved to learn. She had cerebral palsy, which affected her mobility slightly, but it never dampened her spirit. April used leg braces and sometimes needed assistance, but she never let her condition define her. She participated in school activities, made friends easily, and approached each day with enthusiasm. Her favorite color was pink. She loved Disney princesses, particularly Ariel from The Little Mermaid. Her bedroom was filled with toys, stuffed animals, and princess-themed decorations. She enjoyed drawing and coloring, often creating pictures to give to her family members. April had a gentle nature and a kind heart, the type of child who would befriend anyone who seemed lonely or left out. On the afternoon of October 1, 2012, April was especially excited. It was a Monday, and she'd had a good day at school. The weather was mild for early October, with temperatures around 13 degrees Celsius. The sun was shining, and there was just a hint of autumn in the air. After school, April came home and did what she usually did. She asked her mother if she could go outside to play. Coral Jones said yes. It was still light outside, and the Bryn Wygog estate was considered one of the safest places in Machynlleth. Children regularly played in the streets, riding bikes, playing games, and enjoying the freedom that small-town life afforded them. Coral had no reason to worry. April had played outside countless times before without incident. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, April was playing near her home with her best friend. The two girls were riding their bikes up and down the quiet street, laughing and enjoying the mild evening. Other children were out as well, creating the typical sounds of a neighborhood at play. Parents occasionally glanced out their windows to check on their kids, but no one sensed any danger. Coral Jones stepped outside around 7 o'clock to call April in for the evening. She expected to see her daughter riding her bike or playing nearby. But April wasn't there. Coral called out her daughter's name. No response. She walked down the street, checking the usual spots where April might be playing. Still nothing. A knot of worry began to form in Coral's stomach. She approached other children who were still outside and asked if they'd seen April. One of April's friends, a 7-year-old girl, provided information that would send chills down Coral's spine. The little girl told Coral that she'd seen April get into a vehicle. She described it as a light-colored van. The girl said April had gotten into the vehicle willingly, apparently knowing the person inside. Then the van had driven away. Coral's worry instantly transformed into panic. She ran back to her house and told her husband, Paul. They immediately began searching the area, calling April's name, checking with neighbors, looking anywhere their daughter might have gone. But deep down, Coral knew something was terribly wrong. April would never just leave without telling her parents. She would never get into a vehicle with someone, not unless she knew them well and felt safe. By 7:30 in the evening, just 45 minutes after April had last been seen, Paul Jones called the police. He reported his 5-year-old daughter missing and explained that a witness had seen her getting into a van. The dispatcher understood the urgency immediately. A missing child who was last seen getting into a vehicle with someone was every parent's worst nightmare and every police officer's most urgent call. Dyfed police responded within minutes. Officers arrived at the Bryn Wygog estate and immediately began interviewing witnesses and searching the area. The 7-year-old friend who had seen April get into the van was gently questioned. She provided more details. The van was light-colored, possibly light blue or gray. She couldn't see the driver clearly but knew that April had approached the vehicle and gotten in. This information was critical. It meant that April likely knew her abductor. Children, especially young children with special needs like April, are typically taught not to go with strangers. The fact that April had willingly gotten into the vehicle suggested she recognized and trusted the person inside. As darkness fell over Machynlleth, police began a systematic search of the area. Officers went door to door, asking residents if they'd seen anything unusual or noticed any vehicles that didn't belong in the neighborhood. Neighbors gathered in the streets, offering to help search. The community was already mobilizing, driven by fear and desperate hope. By 8 o'clock that evening, just over an hour after April's disappearance, senior officers from Dyfed police had arrived on scene. They quickly assessed the situation and made a critical decision. This wasn't a case of a child who had wandered off or gone to a friend's house without permission. This was an abduction, and every minute mattered. A major incident was declared. Resources from across Wales were immediately mobilized. The decision was made to treat this as a race against time. Statistically, the first few hours after a child abduction are the most critical. If April was going to be found alive, it would likely happen within the next 24 hours. Superintendent Ian John was appointed as the senior investigating officer. He arrived in Mackinac and immediately established a command center. His first priority was organizing a comprehensive search operation. His second priority was identifying and locating the vehicle that April had been seen getting into. The witness description of a light-colored van wasn't much to go on, but it was a start. Police began checking CCTV cameras in the area, though Mackinac was a small town with limited surveillance coverage. They also began compiling a list of every light-colored van registered in the area and cross-referencing it with residents who lived in or near Mackinac. As the search intensified, more witnesses came forward. Several residents reported seeing a light-colored Land Rover Discovery in the area around the time of April's disappearance. This was significant because Land Rovers, while not vans, could be described as such by a young child. The vehicle had been seen driving slowly through the estate, which struck some people as unusual. One witness provided a partial registration number. Police ran it through their system and came up with a match. The vehicle was registered to a man named Mark Leonard Bridger, a 46-year-old local resident who lived in the nearby village of Saines, approximately 5 miles from Mackinac. Officers immediately began investigating Bridger's background. What they discovered was deeply concerning. Bridger had lived in the Mackinac area for several years. He had 5 children from different relationships and was known in the community, though not necessarily well-liked. He had worked various jobs, including as a lifeguard at the local leisure center and as a slaughterhouse worker. Most recently, he'd been doing odd jobs and was reportedly struggling financially. More disturbingly, officers learned that Bridger had some connection to the Jones family. He knew who April was. His children had attended the same school as April and her siblings. He'd worked at the leisure center where local children, including April, sometimes swam. He was familiar enough that April might have recognized him and felt safe getting into his vehicle. At approximately 10:30 that evening, police located Mark Bridger's Land Rover Discovery. It was parked outside his cottage in Saines. Officers approached the vehicle and immediately noticed something alarming. The interior had recently been cleaned. The seats appeared damp, and there was a strong smell of detergent. For experienced investigators, this was a massive red flag. Officers knocked on the door of Bridger's cottage. He answered, appearing disheveled and smelling of alcohol. When asked about his whereabouts that evening, Bridger claimed he'd been out driving around, looking at the river and thinking about his problems. He said he'd been feeling depressed and had been drinking. Officers asked if they could search his property. Bridger consented. What they found inside the cottage would become crucial evidence in the case that would unfold. The interior of the home was messy and unkempt, with empty beer cans and bottles scattered around. But investigators noticed something else. There were signs of recent cleaning in specific areas. Sections of the carpet appeared damp. The bathroom showed evidence of recent scrubbing. Based on the witness testimony, the suspicious cleaning of his vehicle, and his vague account of his evening activities, officers arrested Mark Bridger at 11:45 that evening on suspicion of the abduction of April Jones. He was taken into custody and transported to a police station for questioning. But April was still missing. And as Bridger was being processed at the police station, hundreds of volunteers were gathering in Mackinac to help search for the little girl in the pink coat who had vanished from her street. The news of April's disappearance spread rapidly through the town and beyond. By midnight, the local community center had become an impromptu headquarters for volunteer searchers. Coral and Paul Jones were there, devastated and desperate, coordinating with police and volunteers. Jasmine and Harley, April's older siblings, were in shock, struggling to comprehend how their little sister could simply vanish. Police established search teams and divided the surrounding area into grids. Volunteers were given specific sections to search, equipped with flashlights and instructions on what to look for. The search focused initially on the immediate area around the Bryn Wygog estate, then expanded outward to include nearby fields, forests, and the river. Through the night, hundreds of people combed through the darkness, calling April's name, checking under bushes, behind buildings, in sheds, anywhere a small child might be hidden or might have hidden herself. The temperature dropped to around 8 degrees Celsius, and searchers worried about April being outside in the cold, especially given her medical history and cerebral palsy. As dawn broke on October 2nd, the scale of the search operation became clear. This was no longer just a local effort. Police from across Wales had arrived to assist. Mountain rescue teams were deployed to search the rugged terrain surrounding Machynlleth. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras began flying over the area, scanning for any heat signature that might indicate a small child. The Royal Air Force contributed helicopter support. The Coast Guard joined the search, focusing on waterways and the nearby coastline. Specially trained police search teams with dogs arrived, including cadaver dogs, a grim acknowledgement of what investigators feared they might find. By midday on October 2nd, more than 500 volunteers were actively searching for April. The community center in Machynlleth had transformed into a full operations hub, with maps covering the walls, coordinators directing search parties, and local residents providing food and drink for the exhausted searchers. Media coverage of April's disappearance had gone national. Television news programs interrupted regular broadcasts with updates. April's photograph, showing a beautiful little girl with a bright smile and blonde hair, was displayed on screens across the United Kingdom. The image captured the nation's heart. This wasn't just Machynlleth's tragedy anymore. It was Britain's tragedy. Social media exploded with appeals for information. The hashtag #FindAprilJones began trending on Twitter. Facebook pages dedicated to the search gained thousands of followers within hours. People across the country changed their profile pictures to ribbons in April's favorite color, pink. Candlelight vigils were organized in towns and cities far from Machynlleth, as strangers united in hope and prayer for a little girl they'd never met. Meanwhile, in the interview rooms at the police station, detectives were interrogating Mark Bridger. The interviews were tense and frustrating. Bridger's story kept changing. Initially, he denied having any contact with April that evening. Then, when confronted with witness testimony placing him in the area, he claimed he might have seen her but didn't interact with her. As the interviews continued and evidence mounted, Bridger eventually admitted that April had been in his vehicle. He claimed it was an accident. He said he'd been driving through the estate when April had suddenly run out into the road. He said he'd hit her with his Land Rover. Panicking, he claimed, he'd put her in his vehicle, intending to take her to the hospital, but then he'd blacked out or couldn't remember what happened next. Detectives didn't believe him. The witness testimony clearly indicated that April had approached the vehicle and gotten in willingly, not that she'd been hit by it. Furthermore, if Bridger had genuinely had an accident and wanted to help April, why had he cleaned his vehicle and his home? Why hadn't he called for an ambulance or driven to the hospital? When pressed about April's location, Bridger claimed he couldn't remember. He suggested he might have left her somewhere but couldn't recall where. He mentioned various locations, including near the river, but his accounts were vague and inconsistent. Detectives became increasingly convinced that Bridger was lying and that something terrible had happened to April. Forensic teams descended on Bridger's cottage in Sains. They meticulously searched every inch of the property, collecting evidence. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture. Despite the recent cleaning efforts, luminol testing revealed significant blood staining throughout the cottage. Blood was found on the living room carpet, in the bathroom, and in multiple other locations. DNA testing would later confirm that this blood belonged to April Jones. In the fireplace, investigators found fragments of bone that were later identified as human remains, though too small and too damaged by fire to yield DNA. They also found children's clothing fragments in the wood burner, including pieces of fabric that matched the description of what April had been wearing when she disappeared. Bridger's computer was seized and analyzed. What investigators found was sickening. The hard drive contained images of child sexual abuse. There were also photographs of local children, including images that appeared to have been taken surreptitiously. Some of these images had been digitally manipulated in disturbing ways. Most horrifying of all, there were photographs of April and her siblings among the collection. This discovery transformed the investigation. April hadn't been the victim of an accidental hit-and-run. She had been deliberately targeted by a predator who lived among the community, someone who had been watching local children and harboring dark fantasies that he had finally acted upon. The search for April continued with desperate intensity. Every day, hundreds of volunteers returned to search the forests, fields, and rivers around Machynlleth. Professional search teams methodically covered vast areas of challenging terrain. Divers searched rivers, lakes, and reservoirs. Nothing was left unchecked. Coral and Paul Jones made emotional appeals through the media, begging whoever had taken their daughter to please bring her home. Coral's anguished face became iconic, a symbol of every parent's worst nightmare. She clutched April's favorite toy, a stuffed animal, during press conferences, unable to accept that her baby might not be coming home. The community of Machynlleth refused to give up hope. Pink ribbons appeared on every lamppost, fence, and storefront. Residents organized prayer vigils. The local school set up a memorial garden where children could leave flowers and drawings for April. The town came together in a way that only tragedy can unite people, bonded by shared grief and determination. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. As days turned into weeks, the search operation became one of the largest in British history. Over the course of the investigation, police and volunteers would search an area covering approximately 30 square miles of incredibly difficult terrain. Mountain rescue teams rappelled down cliff faces. Divers searched murky waters in near-freezing conditions. Forensic teams sifted through debris and combed through forests looking for any trace of April. Police brought in specialized equipment, including ground-penetrating radar to search for disturbed earth that might indicate a burial site. They consulted with experts in criminal psychology and forensic science. Every possible resource was deployed in the desperate hunt for April Jones. Mark Bridger remained in custody, charged with April's abduction and murder despite the fact that her body had not been found. This presented a unique challenge for prosecutors. In British law, it's possible to prosecute someone for murder without a body, but it's exceedingly rare and difficult to prove beyond reasonable doubt. The Crown Prosecution Service reviewed the evidence collected against Bridger. The forensic evidence from his cottage was damning. April's blood was found throughout the property in quantities that indicated significant trauma. The bone fragments in the fireplace, while too damaged to provide DNA, were consistent with human remains and had been subjected to intense heat in an apparent attempt to destroy them. The children's clothing fragments found in Bridger's wood burner matched the description of what April had been wearing. Fiber analysis confirmed that these fabric pieces were consistent with April's clothing. The pattern of evidence suggested that Bridger had attempted to destroy all physical evidence of April's presence in his home. Most damning was Bridger's own computer, which revealed a man consumed by disturbing fantasies involving children. The images of local children, including April, combined with child sexual abuse material, painted a picture of a predator who had been escalating toward acting on his impulses. Additionally, Bridger's behavior after April's disappearance was inconsistent with innocence. He had thoroughly cleaned his vehicle and home, focusing specifically on areas where blood evidence was later detected. His constantly changing stories and inability to explain where April was, despite claiming to remember taking her in his vehicle, suggested consciousness of guilt. On October 6, 5 days after April's disappearance, Mark Bridger was formally charged with her murder, as well as with child abduction and perverting the course of justice. He appeared briefly in court and was remanded in custody to await trial. The search for April continued even after Bridger's charging. Police refused to give up hope of finding her body, both to provide closure for her family and to strengthen the case against Bridger. Specialized teams continued searching through October and into November, even as weather conditions deteriorated and winter approached. Investigators interviewed Bridger repeatedly, hoping he would finally disclose April's location. He continued to claim memory loss, sometimes suggesting vague areas where he might have left her, but these leads always proved fruitless. Detectives became convinced that Bridger was deliberately withholding information, perhaps deriving some perverse satisfaction from the anguish he was causing April's family. Forensic analysis of Bridger's Land Rover revealed microscopic evidence that corroborated the prosecution's theory. Despite his cleaning efforts, investigators found traces of April's DNA on the seats and carpets. They also found the presence of cleaning products that Bridger had purchased shortly after April's disappearance, proving premeditation in attempting to destroy evidence. Analysis of Bridger's movements on October 1st was painstakingly reconstructed. Cell phone tower data showed his phone pinging towers in Machynlleth around the time of April's disappearance. CCTV footage, though limited in the small town, captured his Land Rover driving through the area. Witnesses were re-interviewed to create a timeline of his activities. What emerged was a chilling picture. Bridger had been in Machynlleth for hours that day, driving through residential areas where children played. Multiple witnesses reported seeing his Land Rover moving slowly through neighborhoods, the driver appearing to be watching children. This suggested that Bridger had been hunting for a victim, and tragically, April had become his target. Investigators theorized about what had happened after April got into Bridger's vehicle. Based on the forensic evidence, they believed he had driven her to his cottage in Saines, approximately a 10-minute drive from where she was taken. At the cottage, they believed he had sexually assaulted and murdered April, then attempted to dispose of her body, likely by dismembering it and burning parts in his fireplace and wood burner. The small bone fragments found in the fireplace supported this theory, as did the large volume of blood evidence throughout the cottage. The presence of skull fragments suggested that Bridger had attempted to completely destroy April's remains by burning them, a process that would have taken hours and required sustained effort. What Bridger had done with the remaining parts of April's body remained a mystery. Investigators believed he may have disposed of them in the river or buried them in the vast forested areas surrounding his cottage. Despite extensive searches using cadaver dogs and ground-penetrating radar, no further remains were recovered. As winter descended on Wales and the search operation was eventually scaled back, the Jones family faced the devastating reality that they might never be able to properly bury their daughter. The not knowing where April was created an additional layer of torment. Coral and Paul couldn't visit a grave. They couldn't have a funeral service that would provide some sense of closure. Their little girl was simply gone, erased by a monster who refused to give them even this small mercy. The trial of Mark Bridger began on April 29, 2013, at Mold Crown Court in North Wales. The case attracted massive media attention and public interest. Due to the high-profile nature of the case and concerns about juror safety and impartiality, special security measures were implemented. Bridger pleaded not guilty to all charges, including murder, child abduction, and perverting the course of justice. This plea shocked and angered many people. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Bridger forced April's family to endure a trial where graphic details of their daughter's final moments would be presented. The prosecution, led by Elwyn Evans QC, presented a comprehensive case against Bridger. They detailed the forensic evidence found at his cottage, including the bloodstaining, bone fragments, and clothing remnants. They presented the evidence from his computer, showing his disturbing interest in images of child abuse and his collection of photographs of local children. Witnesses testified about seeing Bridger's Land Rover in Machynlleth on October 1st and about seeing April get into a vehicle matching its description. Cell phone and CCTV evidence placed Bridger at the scene. The timeline of his activities that evening was laid out in meticulous detail. Forensic experts testified about the blood evidence and what it indicated about the violence April had suffered. Pathologists explained that the volume of blood found in Bridger's cottage was inconsistent with survival. DNA experts confirmed that the blood belonged to April and that the probability of it being anyone else's was astronomical. Perhaps most damaging was the evidence of Bridger's behavior after April's disappearance. The prosecution detailed his purchases of cleaning supplies, his thorough cleaning of his vehicle and home, and his attempts to destroy evidence in his fireplace and wood burner. They argued that these actions demonstrated consciousness of guilt and premeditation in covering up his crimes. The defense strategy was limited given the overwhelming evidence. Bridger's barrister, Brendan Kelly QC, argued that while Bridger admitted April had died, it had been an accident. Bridger testified in his own defense, maintaining his claim that he had accidentally hit April with his vehicle and that everything that followed was a panic reaction rather than premeditated murder. He claimed that after hitting April, he had put her in his Land Rover and driven toward the hospital but then blacked out due to alcohol consumption. He suggested that he might have hit his head during the incident, causing memory loss. He testified that he had no memory of what he'd done with April's body or how the extensive blood evidence had come to be in his cottage. The prosecution systematically dismantled Bridger's testimony. They pointed out that witnesses had seen April willingly approach and get into his vehicle, not that she'd been hit by it. They noted that if Bridger had truly intended to take April to hospital, he had driven in the opposite direction, toward his isolated cottage rather than toward medical facilities. They questioned how someone with memory loss could remember specific details that were convenient to his defense but claim no memory of critical facts like where he'd put April's body. They highlighted the premeditated nature of his evidence destruction, the cleaning supplies he'd purchased, and the systematic way he'd attempted to eliminate all traces of April from his property. Most devastatingly, the prosecution addressed Bridger's computer evidence. They presented the disturbing images and photographs he'd collected, including pictures of April and her siblings. They argued that this wasn't the computer history of someone who'd had an accidental encounter with a child. This was the computer history of a predator who had been planning to act on his fantasies. Expert witnesses testified about Bridger's internet searches in the days and weeks before April's disappearance. He had visited websites featuring child sexual abuse material. He had searched for terms related to children and sexual violence. He had looked at images of local girls, including April. This wasn't random or accidental. This was a man who had been fixating on his intended victim. Throughout the trial, Coral and Paul Jones sat in the courtroom, forcing themselves to hear every horrific detail about what had happened to their daughter. Coral clutched photographs of April, sometimes openly weeping as evidence was presented. Paul sat stoically, his jaw clenched, occasionally leaving the courtroom when the testimony became too unbearable. The emotional toll on April's family was evident to everyone in the courtroom. This wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a family being forced to confront the worst moments of their daughter's short life, described in clinical detail by experts and challenged by a defense team trying to minimize their client's culpability. The trial lasted approximately 1 month. The jury heard from dozens of witnesses and reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence. The case against Bridger was comprehensive and damning. The defense had little to offer except Bridger's own implausible testimony and appeals to reasonable doubt based on the absence of April's body. On May 30, 2013, after deliberating for just over 4 hours, the jury returned their verdict. Mark Leonard Bridger was found guilty on all counts: murder, child abduction, and perverting the course of justice. As the verdict was read, there was an audible gasp in the courtroom. Coral Jones broke down in tears, supported by family members. Paul Jones closed his eyes, his face showing the weight of the moment. They had justice, but their daughter was still gone, and they still didn't know where she was. Judge John Griffith Williams prepared to pass sentence. In England and Wales, murder carries a mandatory life sentence, but the judge determines the minimum term that must be served before the possibility of parole. Given the severity and nature of the crime, everyone expected a substantial sentence. Judge Williams addressed Bridger directly, his words measured but laced with barely contained disgust. He described the crime as every parent's worst nightmare. He noted the careful planning involved, the selection of a vulnerable victim, and the deliberate destruction of evidence. He highlighted Bridger's refusal to disclose April's location, adding immeasurable additional suffering to an already devastated family. The judge then announced the sentence: life imprisonment with a whole life order. This meant that Bridger would never be eligible for parole. He would spend the rest of his natural life in prison, with no possibility of ever being released. It was one of the harshest sentences that could be imposed in the British legal system, reserved for the most heinous crimes. Bridger showed little reaction to the sentence. He was led from the dock by security officers and transported to begin his life sentence. As he left, family members and members of the public shouted abuse at him, their anger and grief boiling over. Outside the courthouse, the Jones family addressed the media. Coral spoke through tears, thanking everyone who had supported them and participated in the search for April. She described April as a beautiful, lovely girl who would be forever missed. She expressed gratitude for the guilty verdict but said that nothing could ever fill the void April's absence had created in their lives. Paul Jones spoke more briefly, his voice thick with emotion. He thanked the police and prosecution team for their tireless work. He also made a direct appeal to Bridger, pleading with him to finally tell them where April was so they could lay their daughter to rest properly. It was a heartbreaking moment, a father reduced to begging his daughter's murderer for one final act of humanity. Bridger never responded to that appeal. To this day, he has never revealed what he did with April's remains. He maintains his claim of memory loss, though most people, including investigators and the Jones family, believe this is a final act of cruelty, a way for Bridger to maintain some level of control and continue inflicting pain on April's family. In the aftermath of the trial, attention turned to the question of how Bridger had been able to operate undetected in the community. Investigations revealed that while Bridger had no previous convictions for sexual offenses, there had been warning signs that went unheeded. Former partners described him as controlling and occasionally violent. Neighbors reported that they had felt uncomfortable with how Bridger interacted with children, though none had reported these concerns to authorities. His computer use, which clearly showed an escalating interest in child sexual abuse material, had not been detected by law enforcement. The case prompted serious discussions about internet monitoring, the reporting of suspicious behavior, and the systems in place to protect children from predators. Questions were raised about whether anything could have been done to prevent April's murder if warning signs had been acted upon earlier. The investigation also revealed the devastating ease with which Bridger had been able to access images of child sexual abuse online. His computer showed hundreds of such images, accessed through readily available internet connections. This led to renewed calls for stronger internet controls and more aggressive prosecution of those who create, distribute, and consume such material. For the community of Mackinac, the trial's conclusion brought mixed emotions. There was relief that justice had been served and that Bridger would never walk free again. But there was also profound sadness and a sense that their town had been forever changed. The innocence and trust that had characterized this small Welsh community had been shattered. The pink ribbons that had appeared across Mackinac in October 2012 remained in place for years afterward, a permanent memorial to April. The local school created a garden in her memory where children could go to remember their classmate. The community center where volunteers had coordinated search efforts became a gathering place for those still grieving. For April's family, life became about learning to exist with an unfillable void. Coral and Paul struggled with profound grief, compounded by the fact that they had no grave to visit, no place where they could feel close to their daughter. Jasmine and Harley, April's siblings, had to process the loss of their little sister while also watching their parents suffer. The Jones family became advocates for child safety and for changes to laws regarding online child sexual abuse material. They worked with police and child protection organizations to raise awareness about the dangers children face and the warning signs that communities should watch for. They turned their grief into purpose, determined that April's death would not be entirely in vain. In October 2013, exactly 1 year after April's disappearance, a memorial service was held in Mackinac. Thousands of people attended, including residents who had searched for April, police officers who had worked on the case, and strangers from across the United Kingdom who had followed April's story and wanted to pay their respects. The service celebrated April's life, not just her death. Friends and family shared memories of her infectious laugh, her love of pink and princesses, her determination despite her medical challenges, and her kind heart. Poems were read, songs were sung, and pink balloons were released into the Welsh sky, carrying messages of love to a little girl who had captured a nation's heart. The search for April's remains never officially ended. Police continued to follow up on any potential leads, and specialized teams periodically returned to areas around Machynlleth to search. The Jones family held out hope that someday, somehow, they would be able to bring April home and give her a proper burial. In 2014, investigators made one final intensive search effort, deploying the most advanced forensic technology available. They focused on areas around Bridger's cottage and locations he was known to have visited. Despite their best efforts, they found no additional remains. The conclusion was inescapable: Bridger had been extraordinarily successful in destroying or hiding April's body. Forensic experts later theorized that the combination of dismemberment, burning, and possibly dispersal in a river would make it nearly impossible to recover remains, especially after so much time had passed. The small bone fragments found in Bridger's fireplace were likely all that remained of April Jones, a heartbreaking testament to the thoroughness of Bridger's attempts to erase his victim. The case had a lasting impact on British law enforcement and child protection policies. The investigation into April's murder became a case study in missing child investigations, with the rapid response and massive search operation being held up as a model for how such cases should be handled. The coordination between local police, national resources, and community volunteers demonstrated the importance of immediate action in child abduction cases. New protocols were implemented regarding the monitoring of individuals with concerning online behavior. The evidence from Bridger's computer prompted discussions in Parliament about strengthening laws related to possession and distribution of child sexual abuse material. Technology companies faced pressure to do more to prevent such content from being accessible and to report users who searched for or downloaded it. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of children with disabilities. April's cerebral palsy had made her a particularly vulnerable target, and child protection organizations began focusing more resources on educating children with special needs about safety and stranger danger. Programs were developed to help parents of children with disabilities navigate the complex balance between fostering independence and maintaining safety. In 2015, Coral and Paul Jones established the April Jones Memorial Fund, which raised money for local children's causes and for organizations working to prevent child sexual abuse. The fund supported playground equipment, educational programs, and counseling services for children who had experienced trauma. It was a way for April's memory to create something positive in a world that had shown them such darkness. The fund also supported continued search efforts. Although the large-scale official searches had concluded, the Jones family never stopped hoping that someone might find something that would lead them to April. They offered rewards for information and maintained contact with police, always ready to respond if new leads emerged. Mark Bridger's life in prison became a topic of public interest and anger. He was initially held at HMP Wakefield, a high-security prison in West Yorkshire that houses many of Britain's most dangerous criminals. Due to the nature of his crime, Bridger required protective custody. Child killers are among the most hated inmates in the prison system, and Bridger faced constant threats from other prisoners. Reports emerged of attacks on Bridger by fellow inmates. In one incident, he was allegedly beaten severely enough to require medical treatment. Prison officials moved him between facilities multiple times for his own safety. These attacks were met with little sympathy from the public, many of whom felt that Bridger deserved whatever treatment he received. Despite the whole life order, Bridger made attempts to appeal his sentence, arguing that it was too harsh and that he should be given the possibility of parole. These appeals were consistently rejected by higher courts, which upheld the original sentence. Each appeal brought fresh pain to the Jones family, forcing them to relive the case and confront the fact that Bridger was still trying to minimize his accountability. In 2016, Bridger gave an interview to a journalist through an intermediary, claiming that he wanted to set the record straight about what had happened to April. The interview caused outrage when it was published. Bridger continued to maintain that April's death had been accidental and that he couldn't remember what he'd done with her body. He expressed no genuine remorse and seemed more concerned with his own image than with the suffering he'd caused. The Jones family responded with a statement expressing their disgust that Bridger had been given a platform to continue spreading lies. They reiterated their belief that he knew exactly what he'd done with April and that his refusal to tell them was a continuation of the torture he'd inflicted on their family. Many newspapers and media outlets were criticized for giving Bridger any attention at all. As years passed, the story of April Jones remained in the British public consciousness. Her case was featured in numerous true crime documentaries, each retelling bringing her story to new audiences. While some family members found these documentaries difficult to watch, Coral and Paul participated in several, hoping that keeping April's memory alive might somehow lead to information about where she was. The pink ribbons in Machynlleth began to fade with time and weather, but residents regularly replaced them. The town had made an unspoken commitment never to forget April. Local children who had been too young to remember the events of October 2012 grew up learning about April in school, understanding the importance of safety and community vigilance. In 2017, on what would have been April's 10th birthday, a permanent memorial was unveiled in Machynlleth. The memorial featured a bronze statue of a young girl holding a flower, situated in a peaceful garden setting. A plaque bore April's name and dates, along with the words "Forever in our hearts, forever 5 years old." The unveiling ceremony drew hundreds of people, and Coral placed April's favorite stuffed toy at the base of the statue. The memorial became a place of pilgrimage for many people touched by April's story. Visitors from across the United Kingdom and beyond came to leave flowers, toys, and messages. The garden became a place of reflection, not just about April, but about all children lost to violence and the collective responsibility to protect the most vulnerable members of society. April's siblings, Jasmine and Harley, grew into young adults carrying the weight of their sister's loss. Both struggled with grief and trauma but found ways to honor April's memory. Jasmine became involved in child advocacy work, speaking at schools about safety and awareness. Harley pursued a quieter path but remained close to his parents, helping them navigate the ongoing challenges of living with their loss. The psychological impact on the community of Machynlleth was studied by researchers interested in how small communities process collective trauma. The town had experienced something that shattered its sense of security and innocence. Counseling services reported increased anxiety among parents, many of whom became overprotective of their children. Some families moved away, unable to live in a place associated with such horror. But many stayed, determined to reclaim their community and not let Bridger's actions define their town. Community events were organized to bring people together and rebuild the sense of trust and safety that had been damaged. Youth programs were expanded. Neighborhood watch groups became more active. The community chose resilience over despair. In 2018, a cold case review team conducted another examination of the evidence in April's case, using newer forensic techniques and technology. They reanalyzed the bone fragments from Bridger's fireplace using more advanced DNA extraction methods. While they couldn't extract sufficient DNA for a definitive match, the analysis confirmed that the fragments were human remains consistent with a child of April's age. The review team also used advanced computer forensics to recover more data from Bridger's hard drive. What they found was even more disturbing than the original investigation had revealed. Bridger had been researching methods of body disposal and had visited websites about cremation temperatures and decomposition. This evidence further supported the theory that April's murder had been premeditated and that Bridger had planned how to eliminate evidence. This new evidence prompted prosecutors to consider additional charges against Bridger, but ultimately they decided that his whole life sentence meant additional prosecution would serve no practical purpose. He was already facing the maximum possible punishment under British law. The information was shared with the Jones family, who found some grim validation in the confirmation that Bridger had indeed planned April's murder. Throughout all of this, the question of why remained painfully unanswered. What had motivated Bridger to target April specifically? Why had he felt compelled to act on his disturbing fantasies after years of apparently restraining himself? Forensic psychologists who studied the case offered various theories. Some suggested that Bridger had been experiencing a personal crisis that had lowered his inhibitions. He had been drinking heavily, was financially stressed, and had recently ended a relationship. These stressors, combined with his long-standing attraction to children, may have created a perfect storm that led him to act. Others pointed to the escalating nature of his online behavior. His consumption of child sexual abuse material had been increasing in the months before April's murder. Research shows that for some individuals, viewing such material can lead to a desensitization and a progression toward contact offenses. Bridger may have reached a point where fantasy was no longer sufficient. The fact that Bridger had targeted a child he knew, rather than a stranger, suggested opportunistic behavior combined with premeditation. He had been familiar enough with the neighborhood and with local children to know when and where to find victims. April's regular presence outside her home, combined with her trusting nature and her recognition of Bridger, had made her tragically vulnerable. In 2019, Dyfed police announced that the active investigation into April's disappearance was being scaled down. After 7 years of continuous work, thousands of hours of investigation, and exhaustive searches covering hundreds of square miles, they had done everything possible with the evidence and resources available. The case would remain technically open, and any new information would be pursued, but the intensive phase of the investigation was over. This announcement was devastating for the Jones family, even though they had known it was coming. The idea that the police were no longer actively searching for April felt like a final abandonment, even though they understood the practical realities. Coral made a statement thanking the police for their years of dedication but expressing her heartbreak that April had still not been found. The announcement prompted one final surge of public attention to the case. Media outlets ran retrospective pieces on the 7-year anniversary of April's disappearance. Social media campaigns encouraged people to share information about April and to remain vigilant. But as time passed and no new information emerged, the case gradually faded from daily headlines, though never from the hearts of those who had been touched by it. By 2020, April would have been 13 years old, a teenager entering adolescence. Coral and Paul often spoke about what might have been. They imagined her starting secondary school, developing new interests, perhaps becoming interested in makeup and fashion, navigating the challenges of teenage life. These thoughts were both comforting and agonizing, a reminder of all that had been stolen from April and from them. The COVID-19 pandemic that began in 2020 brought its own challenges to the Jones family. Like everyone else, they faced lockdowns and isolation. But for them, the isolation amplified their grief. The memorial events and community gatherings that had provided some comfort were canceled. The support networks they had built were suddenly difficult to access. However, the pandemic also brought an unexpected development. With more people spending time online, social media attention to cold cases surged. True crime communities on platforms like Reddit and Facebook began discussing April's case again, analyzing evidence and generating theories. While some of this attention was unwelcome and occasionally insensitive, it also kept April's story alive and occasionally generated leads that were passed to police. One such lead came in 2021 when someone claimed to have information about a location where Bridger might have disposed of remains. Police investigated the tip, conducting searches in a forested area several miles from Bridger's cottage. Despite thorough searching with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs, nothing was found. It was another heartbreaking dead end for the Jones family. In 2022, 10 years after April's disappearance, major commemorative events were held in Mackinac. The 10th anniversary brought renewed media attention and reflection on a case that had shocked the nation. Documentaries were produced examining the investigation and its impact. Books were published analyzing the case from legal, forensic, and psychological perspectives. The Jones family participated in a special memorial service at the site of April's statue. Hundreds of people attended, including many of the police officers who had worked on the case, volunteers who had searched for April, and members of the public who had never met April but had been moved by her story. Pink balloons were released, and a choir sang hymns that had been favorites at April's school. Coral spoke at the service, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. She talked about April's spirit, her determination, and her love of life. She thanked everyone who had supported the family over the decade and who continued to keep April's memory alive. She also made another direct appeal to Bridger, asking him to finally end their suffering by telling them where April was. Paul Jones also spoke, expressing both gratitude and ongoing anguish. He described the decade as feeling like a life sentence for the family, noting the painful irony that Bridger's whole life sentence meant they would all be imprisoned by this tragedy for the rest of their lives. He spoke about the importance of cherishing children and protecting them, urging everyone to be vigilant in their communities. The 10th anniversary also prompted reflection on the changes that had occurred in British society since April's murder. Laws regarding online child sexual abuse material had been strengthened. Technology companies had implemented better detection and reporting systems, though advocacy groups argued much more needed to be done. Schools had enhanced their safety education programs, teaching children about dangers while trying not to traumatize them with fear. The case had also influenced how law enforcement approached missing child investigations. The rapid response in April's case, despite the tragic outcome, was now held up as a model. Police forces across the United Kingdom had adopted protocols ensuring that child abduction cases received immediate, comprehensive responses with maximum resource deployment in the critical first hours. In 2023, Bridger made another appeal against his whole life sentence, arguing that new legal precedents regarding sentencing meant he should be given the possibility of parole. The appeal was heard by the Court of Appeal, and once again, the Jones family had to endure the process of the case being reopened and examined. The Court of Appeal rejected Bridger's appeal unanimously. The judges reaffirmed that the severity of his crime, the vulnerability of his victim, the premeditation involved, and his continued refusal to disclose April's location all justified the whole life tariff. They noted that Bridger had shown no genuine remorse and that he continued to minimize his actions and lie about what had happened. Outside the court, the Jones family's solicitor read a statement on their behalf. The family expressed relief at the decision but frustration that they continued to be subjected to appeals that forced them to relive their trauma. They called for changes to the law that would limit the ability of offenders serving whole life orders to make repeated appeals on the same grounds. As of 2024, Mark Bridger remained in prison, now aged 58. Reports from the prison system indicated that he had been involved in multiple altercations with other inmates and had spent significant time in solitary confinement for his own protection. He had allegedly attempted to engage journalists and documentary makers in telling his story, though most had refused, not wanting to give him a platform. The Jones family continued their advocacy work through the April Jones Memorial Fund. They had expanded their efforts to support not just local causes but national organizations working on child protection. They had become respected voices in discussions about online safety, supporting legislation that would require technology companies to do more to prevent the spread of child sexual abuse material. Coral and Paul had aged visibly under the weight of their grief. Photographs from recent memorial services showed the toll that 12 years of living with loss and uncertainty had taken. But they remained committed to keeping April's memory alive and to preventing other families from experiencing what they had endured. The search for April Jones technically remained open. Dyfed Police maintained a file on the case and continued to accept tips and information from the public. Advances in forensic technology meant that periodically, evidence from the original investigation was re-examined using new techniques. But as each year passed without a significant breakthrough, the likelihood of finding April's remains diminished. Forensic experts acknowledged that Bridger had been devastatingly effective in destroying or hiding evidence. The combination of burning, possible dismemberment, and the vast wilderness areas surrounding Machynlleth created nearly insurmountable obstacles to recovery. Some investigators privately admitted that they believed April's remains had been so thoroughly destroyed or dispersed that they might never be found. This reality was agonizing for the Jones family. The lack of a body meant they couldn't have a traditional funeral or burial. They couldn't visit a grave. They had created memorial spaces and held services, but there was always an incompleteness to these rituals. A part of April was still missing, still out there somewhere, and that knowledge haunted them. The community of Machynlleth had learned to live with its dark history, but the town would forever be associated with April's name. Tour guides in the area sometimes pointed out the estate where April had lived, and true crime enthusiasts occasionally made pilgrimages to the town, much to the discomfort of residents who wanted to move forward while honoring April's memory appropriately. The case had become a cultural touchstone in Britain, referenced in discussions about child safety, internet regulation, and criminal justice. April's smiling face, frozen forever at 5 years old in the photographs that had been shared millions of times, remained one of the most recognizable images associated with child protection advocacy in the United Kingdom. Educational programs used April's case as a teaching tool, though carefully and respectfully. Schools discussed the importance of safety awareness without terrifying children. Parents learned about red flags and warning signs. Communities were encouraged to look out for one another and to report concerns rather than assume someone else would act. The psychological impact on those directly involved in the case remained profound. Police officers who had searched for April and investigated her murder spoke about the lasting effect it had on them. Many required counseling to process the trauma of working on such a horrific case. Some left law enforcement entirely, unable to continue after being exposed to such darkness. The volunteers who had searched for April also carried lasting memories. Many described the experience as life-changing, giving them a heightened awareness of how quickly tragedy could strike and how important community solidarity was in times of crisis. Annual gatherings of volunteers became a tradition, providing support and remembrance for those who had participated in the search. As we approach the 13th anniversary of April's disappearance in October 2025, the case remains one of the most significant child murder investigations in British history. The massive search operation, the comprehensive forensic investigation, and the successful prosecution despite the absence of a body all set precedents that continue to influence law enforcement. But beyond the legal and procedural impacts, April's case remains a human tragedy of incomprehensible proportions. A little girl who fought to come into this world, who overcame medical challenges, who brought joy to her family and community, was stolen in a moment of evil that no amount of understanding can ever rationalize or excuse. The Jones family continues to live with their loss every single day. Birthdays and holidays are particularly painful, marking the absence of the little girl who should have been growing up, experiencing life, creating memories. They've had to navigate major family milestones, weddings, graduations, births of grandchildren, all shadowed by the empty place where April should have been. Coral and Paul have become almost reluctant experts on grief, often supporting other families who have lost children to violence. They understand the unique torture of not knowing, of having questions that may never be answered, of living with a wound that can never fully heal. Their strength in the face of unimaginable suffering has inspired many, though they would give anything to not have had to develop that strength. April's siblings have built their own lives but carry their sister's memory with them. They've spoken about the challenge of being known primarily as April Jones' brother and sister rather than as individuals in their own right. But they've also expressed pride in how their family has tried to create meaning from tragedy and how they've worked to protect other children. The question of what more could have been done to prevent April's murder continues to haunt those involved. In retrospect, warning signs about Bridger's behavior and interests were evident. But at the time, no crime had been committed, and no one had connected the dots that might have identified him as a danger. This has led to difficult conversations about the balance between privacy and security, between civil liberties and child protection. Some argue that more aggressive monitoring of internet activity could have flagged Bridger's consumption of child sexual abuse material and possibly prevented April's murder. Others worry about creating a surveillance state and argue that the vast majority of people who view such material never progress to contact offenses. These debates continue in Parliament and in society at large, with no easy answers. Technology companies have implemented more sophisticated detection systems for child sexual abuse material, using artificial intelligence and machine learning to identify and remove such content. They've also improved their reporting to law enforcement. But the scale of the problem remains enormous, with thousands of new images and videos being created and shared every year. The demand for such material creates the supply, and the supply creates more victims. Breaking this cycle requires coordinated international effort, aggressive prosecution, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior. April's case contributed to growing awareness of these issues, but the problem persists and likely always will to some degree. For Mark Bridger, life in prison has reportedly been difficult and dangerous. As a child killer, he occupies the lowest rung of the prison hierarchy. He has been moved between facilities multiple times for his own safety and has spent extended periods in segregation. Some would argue this is appropriate justice. Others maintain that regardless of his crimes, he has human rights that must be protected. Bridger's refusal to disclose April's location remains his final act of control and cruelty. He maintains his claim of memory loss, though few believe him. Some psychologists suggest that revealing what he did with April's body would force him to fully confront the reality of his actions, and his continued denial serves as a psychological defense mechanism. Others believe he derives satisfaction from the continued suffering of April's family. There have been occasional reports of Bridger expressing remorse or a desire to provide information, but these have never led anywhere. He has allegedly told fellow inmates various stories about what happened to April, but these accounts are contradictory and likely fabricated. Investigators have followed up on these claims when they've been reported, but they've always proven to be dead ends or lies. The Jones family has made it clear that they don't want to hear from Bridger unless he's genuinely ready to tell them where April is. They're not interested in his excuses, his self-serving narratives, or his attempts to minimize what he did. They want one thing: the location of their daughter's remains so they can finally lay her to rest properly. The memorial statue in Machynlleth has become a pilgrimage site not just for those connected to April's case but for anyone grieving the loss of a child. People leave toys, flowers, and heartfelt notes. The garden surrounding the statue is meticulously maintained by volunteers who consider it an honor to care for this special place. It has become a symbol of collective grief and determination to protect children. On October 1st each year, a memorial gathering is held at the statue. The size of the crowd varies, but the Jones family always attends, along with a core group of community members, police officers, and supporters. Candles are lit as darkness falls, creating a sea of flickering lights in the autumn evening. It's a moment of collective remembrance and a renewal of the commitment to never forget April. The pink ribbons that became synonymous with April's case still appear across Machynlleth during October. They serve as a visual reminder of a little girl who loved that color and of a community that refuses to let her memory fade. They're a statement that April mattered, that her life had value, and that what happened to her can never be allowed to happen again if vigilance and community action can prevent it. Thank you for staying with us through this incredibly difficult case. If this story has affected you, please take a moment right now to subscribe to Cold Case Crimelab, hit that like button, and most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell us what you think about this case. Share your thoughts on how we can better protect children in our communities. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important stories to light and keeps cases like April's in the public consciousness where they belong. Justice doesn't end with a conviction. It continues with remembrance, with learning, and with action. So please, engage with this content, share it responsibly, and help us make sure April Jones is never forgotten. The legacy of April Jones extends far beyond the tragic circumstances of her death. She has become a symbol of innocence stolen, of the vulnerability of children, and of the evil that can exist hidden within seemingly normal communities. Her case has educated millions about the realities of child predators, the importance of vigilance, and the devastating impact of these crimes on families and communities. Educational institutions now use April's case in training programs for teachers, social workers, and law enforcement officers. It demonstrates the importance of recognizing warning signs, acting on concerns, and understanding how predators operate. While it's painful to use April's story in this way, it serves the purpose of potentially preventing future tragedies. Child protection organizations have reported increased public engagement and support since April's case gained prominence. People are more willing to report suspicious behavior, more aware of online dangers, and more committed to creating safe environments for children. April's legacy, forged in tragedy, has contributed to making the world slightly safer for other children. The Jones family has been remarkably generous in their willingness to participate in educational efforts and to share their story despite the immense pain it causes them. They've spoken at conferences, participated in documentaries, and supported legislative efforts. Their motivation is simple: if April's death can prevent even one other child from suffering a similar fate, then something meaningful will have come from their loss. As we conclude this examination of April Jones' case, we're left with troubling questions that have no satisfactory answers. How does a community recover from such a violation of trust? How does a family survive the loss of a child under such horrific circumstances? How do we balance our desire for safety with our values of privacy and freedom? How do we identify and stop predators before they act? These questions don't have easy solutions. Child protection is an ongoing challenge that requires vigilance, resources, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. April's case reminds us that evil can exist anywhere, that predators often hide in plain sight, and that no community is immune from tragedy. But April's case also demonstrates the power of community response, the dedication of law enforcement professionals, and the strength of a family refusing to let grief destroy them. The massive search operation, while ultimately unsuccessful in finding April, showed what communities can accomplish when they unite around a common purpose. The police investigation, resulting in a successful prosecution despite enormous challenges, demonstrated the importance of thorough, professional law enforcement work. April Jones was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a student, a friend. She was a little girl who loved pink, who adored Disney princesses, who fought through medical challenges with determination. She had dreams and potential that were stolen from her. When we remember April, we should remember the complete person she was, not just the circumstances of her death. Her parents continue to keep her memory alive through the Memorial Fund, through their advocacy work, and through their refusal to let time erase their daughter from public consciousness. They've turned their grief into purpose, their pain into protection for others. It's a testament to human resilience and to a love that death cannot diminish. For the community of Mackinac, April's case will always be a part of its history. The town has had to grapple with being known for this tragedy while also trying to maintain its identity as a beautiful, welcoming place. Residents have worked hard to honor April's memory appropriately while also moving forward with their lives. It's a delicate balance, but one they've navigated with grace and dignity. The investigation into April's disappearance and murder set numerous precedents in British law enforcement. The rapid response, the coordination between agencies, the scale of the search operation, and the successful prosecution all became models for handling similar cases. Training materials based on April's case are now used throughout the United Kingdom and internationally. Forensic techniques developed or refined during the investigation have been applied to other cases. The methods used to recover and analyze microscopic DNA evidence, the approaches to digital forensics on Bridger's computer, and the strategies for prosecuting murder without a body have all contributed to advances in forensic science and criminal investigation. The case also influenced legislation. Discussions prompted by April's murder contributed to stronger laws regarding online child sexual abuse material, increased penalties for possession and distribution, and enhanced requirements for internet service providers to monitor and report illegal content. While these changes came too late for April, they may protect future children. Media coverage of April's case was extensive and largely respectful, though there were instances of sensationalism and overreach. The case prompted discussions about responsible crime reporting, particularly regarding cases involving children. Many news organizations adopted stricter guidelines about what details to report and how to balance public interest with respect for victims and their families. The true crime community's interest in April's case has been both a blessing and a curse for her family. On one hand, continued attention keeps the case in public consciousness and potentially generates leads. On the other hand, some true crime content has been exploitative or disrespectful, treating April's death as entertainment rather than tragedy. The Jones family has had to navigate this complicated landscape while trying to control their daughter's narrative. Social media played a complex role in April's case. In the immediate aftermath of her disappearance, social media helped spread information rapidly and mobilize volunteers. The hashtag #FindAprilJones became one of the most widely used in British Twitter history. People across the country and around the world changed their profile pictures to pink ribbons in solidarity. However, social media also spread misinformation, enabled vigilante behavior, and occasionally interfered with the police investigation. False accusations were made against innocent people. Conspiracy theories circulated. The Jones family received both overwhelming support and cruel messages from internet trolls. This duality illustrates both the power and the problems of social media in high-profile criminal cases. The psychological trauma experienced by those close to the case extended beyond the immediate family. April's classmates, some now young adults, carry memories of losing their friend. Teachers who knew April have spoken about the lasting impact of her death. Neighbors who watched her play outside, never imagining danger could be lurking so close, struggled with guilt and fear. The searchers who spent days and weeks looking for April in difficult terrain and terrible weather experienced secondary trauma. Finding no trace of the little girl they were desperately seeking was its own kind of heartbreak. Many formed lasting bonds with each other, united by their shared experience and commitment to April's memory. The police officers who worked the case, particularly those who processed Bridger's cottage and examined the evidence of what he'd done, required professional support to cope with what they'd witnessed. Some described April's case as the most difficult they'd ever worked, the one that stayed with them long after they'd moved on to other investigations. Expert witnesses who testified at Bridger's trial, particularly those who had to describe in clinical detail what the forensic evidence revealed about April's final moments, also experienced psychological impact. Presenting such information, even in the controlled environment of a courtroom, knowing April's family was listening, was emotionally devastating for many professionals involved. The judicial system's handling of April's case was widely praised but also raised difficult questions. The successful prosecution without a body was a significant legal achievement, but it required the jury to make a determination of murder based on circumstantial evidence. While the evidence was overwhelming, the absence of April's remains meant there was inherently more uncertainty than in cases where a body provides definitive proof of death and manner of death. The whole life order given to Bridger was appropriate given the severity of his crimes, but it also meant that he had no incentive to cooperate or provide information about April's location. Some argued that offering the possibility of parole in exchange for disclosure might have been more effective in achieving closure for the family. Others maintained that no such deals should ever be made with child killers. The question of whether Bridger should have been allowed to give interviews from prison remained controversial. While most media outlets refused to give him a platform, a few did, arguing for public interest and transparency. The Jones family and many others felt this was inappropriate and that child killers should be denied the opportunity to tell their stories or seek attention. Prison conditions for offenders like Bridger also sparked debate. While many felt he deserved harsh treatment, others argued that maintaining humane prison conditions was essential regardless of the crime. The reports of attacks on Bridger by fellow inmates raised questions about whether prison authorities were doing enough to protect him or whether they were tacitly allowing rough justice to occur. As forensic technology continues to advance, there remains hope that someday, new techniques might lead to a breakthrough in locating April's remains. Ground-penetrating radar becomes more sophisticated. DNA analysis methods improve. Geographic profiling tools evolve. Each advancement brings a glimmer of possibility that what seems impossible now might become achievable in the future. The Jones family remains open to any legitimate efforts to find April. They've cooperated with every police initiative, every new search, every re-examination of evidence. Their hope, though tempered by years of disappointment, has never entirely died. They continue to believe that someday, somehow, they'll be able to bring April home and give her the burial she deserves. In the meantime, they've created alternative ways to memorialize their daughter. The statue in Mackinac serves as a physical focal point. The Memorial Fund provides a way to create positive change in April's name. Family gatherings include moments to remember and honor April. They've found ways to keep her present in their lives despite her absence. The impact of April's case on British society is difficult to quantify but undeniably significant. Surveys showed increased parental anxiety about child safety in the years following her murder. Sales of GPS tracking devices for children spiked. Enrollment in self-defense classes for kids increased. Communities organized more safety awareness programs. Whether these changes made children meaningfully safer is debatable. Statistics show that children remain far more likely to be harmed by someone they know than by a stranger, and stranger abductions like April's, while devastating, are statistically rare. But the heightened awareness and precautions, even if sometimes driven by fear, reflected a society grappling with how to protect its most vulnerable members. The case also influenced popular culture. References to April appeared in television dramas, books, and films dealing with child safety and criminal investigations. Some were tasteful and respectful. Others were exploitative. The Jones family had little control over how their daughter's story was used, a painful reminder that tragedy becomes public property in ways that families cannot control. Academically, April's case has been studied extensively. Criminologists have analyzed the investigation. Psychologists have examined Bridger's behavior and motivations. Sociologists have studied the community impact. Forensic scientists have reviewed the evidence and techniques used. Legal scholars have examined the prosecution and sentencing. April's case has become a multidisciplinary case study in numerous fields. These academic examinations serve important purposes in advancing knowledge and potentially preventing future tragedies. But they also represent another layer of April's life being dissected and analyzed, often without the family's input or consent. The Jones family has had to accept that their daughter's story belongs to history now, studied and discussed by people who never knew her as the living, laughing child she was. International interest in April's case reflected broader concerns about child safety that transcend national boundaries. Similar cases in other countries drew comparisons to April's murder. International law enforcement agencies shared information about investigation techniques. Child protection organizations coordinated across borders to address the global nature of online child exploitation. April's case contributed to growing recognition that protecting children requires international cooperation. Predators operate online across national boundaries. Child sexual abuse material is distributed globally. Effective responses require countries to work together, share intelligence, and coordinate enforcement efforts. April's death, while deeply local in its impact on Mackinac, had global implications. As we reflect on over a decade since April's disappearance, certain truths remain unchangeable. A little girl was stolen from her family and community. Her life was ended by someone who should never have had access to her. Her remains were hidden or destroyed, denying her family even the comfort of a proper burial. A predator who gave every indication of his dangerous inclinations was not stopped before he acted. These are the failures that haunt everyone connected to April's case. Could something have been done differently? Could warning signs have been heeded? Could systems have functioned better? The answer is almost certainly yes, but that knowledge provides no comfort and cannot change what happened. What can change is how we move forward. The lessons learned from April's case, painful as they are, can inform better protections for children. The awareness raised can lead to more vigilant communities. The legal precedent set can ensure more effective prosecutions. The technological advances can help identify predators before they harm children. April Jones fought to come into this world and fought every day of her short life. She overcame medical challenges that might have defeated others. She brought joy to everyone who knew her. She deserved a long, happy life filled with growth, achievement, and love. That was stolen from her, but her memory and her impact live on. Her parents, siblings, and extended family continue to honor her by living, by loving, by working to protect other children. They've shown remarkable strength in the face of unspeakable loss. They've turned grief into purpose and pain into advocacy. They've refused to let Bridger's evil define their family or destroy them. The community of Machynlleth has also shown resilience and compassion. They've supported the Jones family through over a decade of grief. They've maintained April's memory with dignity and love. They've refused to let their town be defined solely by one man's evil act. The pink ribbons that still appear each October are a testament to a community's enduring commitment to one of its own. Mark Bridger will spend the rest of his life in prison, but that punishment, however appropriate, cannot undo what he did. It cannot bring April back. It cannot heal the wounds he inflicted on her family and community. Justice was served in the legal sense, but true justice, the kind that would restore what was lost, is impossible. The search for April Jones may never truly end. Her family will never stop hoping for answers. Investigators will never close the file completely. Technology may yet provide breakthroughs that seem impossible now. But regardless of whether her remains are ever found, April's story will continue to matter. She matters because every child matters. She matters because her loss reminds us of what we have to protect. She matters because her family's strength inspires others facing unimaginable grief. She matters because the lessons learned from her case help protect other children. She matters because a life, no matter how brief, has inherent value and meaning. In the years since April's disappearance, thousands of children have been born in Machynlleth and the surrounding areas. They play in the same streets where April once played. They attend the same school she attended. They grow up hearing about April Jones, learning her story as part of their community's history. In this way, April's presence continues in the town she called home. These children are growing up in a world shaped partly by what happened to April. Their parents are more vigilant. Their teachers are better trained in recognizing warning signs. Their community is more united in protecting its young. If April's death has made even one child safer, then some meaning, however small, has emerged from tragedy. The Jones family has expressed hope that eventually, April's story will be remembered not primarily for how she died but for how she lived. They want people to remember her smile, her determination, her kindness. They want her legacy to be about the positive changes that emerged from tragedy, not just the tragedy itself. They want April to be more than a cautionary tale or a symbol of loss. This is the challenge for all of us who learn about April's case. It's easy to focus on the horror, the evil, the unanswered questions. It's harder but more important to remember the real child at the center of this story. April Sulin Jones was not just a victim. She was a person, a little girl with preferences and dreams, fears and hopes, a personality and spirit that touched everyone who knew her. Her favorite color was pink. She loved Ariel from The Little Mermaid. She enjoyed drawing and giving her artwork to family members. She fought through medical challenges with courage. She played with her friends on sunny October evenings. She trusted the adults in her community to keep her safe. She was 5 years old. These details matter. They humanize April in a way that statistics and legal proceedings cannot. They remind us that behind every crime, every investigation, every headline, there are real people with real lives. April was not a case number or a news story. She was a beloved daughter, sister, granddaughter, niece, friend, and student. The photographs of April that have been shared millions of times show a beautiful child with a radiant smile. In those images, she looks happy, carefree, loved. Those photographs were taken in a time before October 1, 2012, when her family's world was intact and their future seemed secure. Looking at those images now, knowing what would happen, is almost unbearable. But those photographs also show us who April was meant to be. They show us what was stolen. They remind us why cases like this matter so profoundly. They give a face and a name to statistics about child abduction and murder. They transform abstract concerns about child safety into something immediate and personal. April's case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the societies we've created. Predators exist among us, often hidden behind facades of normalcy. Technology has created new dangers alongside its benefits. Children are vulnerable in ways that require constant vigilance to protect. Evil is real and can strike anywhere, even in the safest-seeming communities. These truths are frightening, and it's tempting to look away, to focus on more pleasant topics, to assume that tragedies like April's only happen to other people in other places. But April's case teaches us that nowhere is completely safe and that protection requires awareness, action, and community commitment. The massive volunteer response to April's disappearance demonstrated the best of human nature in response to the worst. Thousands of people, many of them strangers to the Jones family, dropped everything to search for a missing child. They braved difficult terrain and harsh weather. They gave up sleep, time with their own families, and their own comfort to look for April. This response continues in different forms today. People donate to the April Jones Memorial Fund. They attend memorial events. They share information about child safety. They watch for warning signs in their own communities. The spirit of solidarity and compassion that emerged in October 2012 persists, channeled into ongoing efforts to protect children and support families affected by violence. The media attention to April's case, while sometimes problematic, also served important functions. It kept the search efforts visible and encouraged people to come forward with information. It educated the public about child safety issues. It put pressure on authorities to dedicate maximum resources to the investigation. It ensured that April's story wouldn't be forgotten or dismissed. However, media coverage also raised ethical questions about privacy, sensationalism, and the rights of crime victims and their families. The Jones family has been both grateful for and frustrated by media attention. They needed public awareness to support the search and investigation, but they also suffered from intrusive reporting and insensitive questions during their most vulnerable moments. Finding the right balance between public interest and family privacy in high-profile cases remains challenging. April's case contributed to ongoing discussions about media ethics and responsibility in crime reporting. Some news organizations revised their guidelines based on lessons learned from covering her disappearance and murder. The role of social media in April's case was similarly complex. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook allowed information to spread rapidly and mobilized support quickly. The Find April Jones campaign reached millions of people within hours. But social media also spread rumors, enabled harassment, and sometimes hindered the investigation by encouraging amateur detective work that generated false leads. Today's true crime culture, with its podcasts, YouTube channels, and online communities, keeps cases like April's in public consciousness. This attention can be valuable in generating new leads and maintaining pressure for answers. But it can also be exploitative, treating real tragedies as entertainment and causing additional pain to grieving families. The Jones family has had to navigate this landscape carefully, cooperating with some true crime coverage while refusing others. They've tried to maintain control over April's narrative while accepting that her story has become public property to some degree. It's an impossible balance, and they've done their best in circumstances no family should have to face. The psychological literature on grief emphasizes that losing a child is among the most traumatic experiences humans can endure. Losing a child to violence is even more devastating. Losing a child without recovering their remains adds another layer of what grief counselors call ambiguous loss, a grief that cannot achieve normal closure. The Jones family lives with all of these compounding factors. Their grief is complicated by trauma, by public scrutiny, by the legal process, by unanswered questions, and by the absence of a body to bury. Mental health professionals who have studied their case note the extraordinary resilience required to function under such circumstances. Coral and Paul have spoken openly about their struggles with depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. They've described the difficulty of maintaining their relationship under the strain of shared grief. They've talked about the challenge of supporting their surviving children while managing their own devastation. Their honesty about these struggles has helped other bereaved parents feel less alone. Support groups for families of missing and murdered children have found that the Jones family's public presence has encouraged others to seek help and share their experiences. Knowing that even in the worst circumstances, people find ways to continue living provides hope to others facing similar tragedies. The Jones family didn't choose to become advocates or symbols, but they've accepted this role with grace. The investigation into April's murder pushed forensic science in several important directions. The techniques used to detect and analyze microscopic blood evidence, even after extensive cleaning attempts, have been refined and applied to other cases. The methods for recovering data from damaged or deliberately erased computer hard drives have advanced. The strategies for building murder prosecutions without a body have been studied and improved. Forensic anthropologists who examined the bone fragments from Bridger's fireplace developed better methods for analyzing heavily damaged remains. While they couldn't extract DNA from April's remains, the techniques they developed have been used successfully in other cases. Every forensic advance, however tragic its origin, potentially helps solve future crimes. The search operation for April also advanced techniques for organizing and managing large-scale volunteer efforts. The coordination between professional search teams and civilian volunteers, the grid system used to systematically cover vast areas, and the methods for documenting search efforts all became models for future operations. Mountain rescue teams in particular studied the April Jones search as an example of best practices. Police interview techniques were also examined and refined based on the Bridger interrogations. The challenge of interviewing a suspect who repeatedly changes his story, claims memory loss, and shows signs of both calculation and possible intoxication required sophisticated approaches. The interviews were later used in training programs to teach detectives how to handle difficult suspects. The prosecution of Bridger without April's body required innovative legal strategies. Prosecutors had to construct a narrative of what happened based on circumstantial evidence, forensic findings, and Bridger's own contradictory statements. The successful conviction set important precedents for future cases where bodies are not recovered or are too damaged to provide definitive evidence. Legal scholars have noted that the April Jones case demonstrated that with sufficient circumstantial evidence, murder convictions can be secured even without a body. This has implications for cases where killers successfully hide or destroy remains. It sends a message that destroying evidence will not necessarily prevent prosecution and conviction. The whole life order given to Bridger was one of relatively few such sentences imposed in British legal history. Reserved for the most heinous crimes, whole life orders ensure that certain offenders will never be released. The appropriateness of such sentences remains debated, with some arguing they're necessary for public protection and justice, while others maintain they're inhumane regardless of the crime. In Bridger's case, few disputed that the sentence was appropriate. The premeditated nature of the crime, the vulnerability of the victim, the destruction of evidence, and the refusal to disclose the body's location all justified the harshest possible punishment. The sentence sent a clear message about how British society views crimes against children. The appeals process has allowed Bridger to repeatedly challenge his sentence, causing additional pain to the Jones family each time. This has prompted discussions about whether offenders serving whole life orders should have limits on their appeal rights. Balancing the right to appeal against the suffering of victims' families presents difficult ethical and legal questions. Some legal reforms have been proposed to address this issue, including requiring new evidence or changed circumstances before allowing appeals, rather than permitting repeated challenges on the same grounds. April's case has been cited in these discussions as an example of why such reforms might be necessary. The impact of April's case on child protection policy in the United Kingdom has been significant and multifaceted. Government agencies have implemented stronger protocols for information sharing between police, social services, and schools. The barriers that once prevented different agencies from communicating effectively about concerning individuals have been reduced. Internet service providers now face stronger requirements to monitor and report illegal content, including child sexual abuse material. The laws governing such content have been strengthened, with longer sentences and fewer opportunities for plea bargains. Technology companies have invested in better detection systems, though advocates argue much more needs to be done. Schools have enhanced their safeguarding training for all staff, not just designated protection officers. Teachers learn to recognize signs of grooming, abuse, and concerning behavior. Students receive age-appropriate education about safety, boundaries, and when to report concerns. These changes, while they cannot guarantee safety, create additional layers of protection. Parents have become more aware of online dangers and the importance of monitoring children's internet use. While this awareness sometimes verges into helicopter parenting and excessive anxiety, it reflects a society taking child safety more seriously. The balance between protecting children and allowing them appropriate independence remains challenging but important. Community vigilance has increased, with neighbors more willing to report suspicious behavior and concerns about children. This has benefits but also risks, including false accusations and invasion of privacy. Finding the right balance between vigilance and respecting civil liberties is an ongoing challenge that April's case brought into sharp focus. The question of how to identify potential predators before they act remains largely unanswered. Bridger showed warning signs in retrospect, viewing illegal material and displaying concerning behavior around children, but he had no criminal record and no official reports had been made about him. Many people consume illegal material without progressing to contact offenses, making prediction difficult and raising civil liberties concerns. Risk assessment tools have been developed to try to identify individuals most likely to commit contact offenses, but they remain imperfect. The challenge of balancing public safety with individual rights when someone hasn't yet committed a contact offense presents profound ethical and practical difficulties. April's case illustrates the tragic consequences when someone dangerous isn't identified in time, but it doesn't provide easy answers about prevention. Research into the psychology of child predators has advanced significantly in recent years, partly motivated by high-profile cases like April's. Understanding what drives individuals to harm children and what factors might prevent them from acting on their impulses is crucial for developing effective prevention strategies. This research is ongoing and complex, involving neurological, psychological, social, and environmental factors. Treatment programs for individuals attracted to children but who haven't offended have been developed in several countries. These programs aim to prevent offenses before they occur by providing support and strategies for managing attractions. The effectiveness of such programs is still being evaluated, but they represent an attempt to address the problem proactively rather than only responding after crimes occur. April's case has also influenced international efforts to combat child sexual abuse material online. The global nature of the Internet means that material produced anywhere can be accessed everywhere. International law enforcement cooperation has increased, with agencies sharing information and coordinating investigations across borders. Major operations have taken down production and distribution networks. Technology companies have developed sophisticated tools to detect and report illegal material. Hash databases allow automatic identification of known images. Machine learning algorithms can identify new material. Human moderators review flagged content. While these systems aren't perfect and raise privacy concerns, they represent significant advances in disrupting the distribution of child sexual abuse material. However, the problem persists and likely always will to some extent. New material is constantly created. Distribution methods evolve to evade detection. The demand remains high. Addressing this requires sustained, coordinated international effort and willingness to invest resources in what is difficult and disturbing work. April's legacy includes contributing to greater awareness of these issues and stronger commitment to addressing them. Her case helped move the conversation from whether online child sexual abuse material is a serious problem to how we can most effectively combat it. The connection between consuming such material and committing contact offenses remains complex and debated, but April's case provided a stark example of that progression. For the town of Mackinac, healing has been a long and ongoing process. The initial shock and grief gradually transformed into determination to honor April's memory and reclaim their community. Local leaders worked to balance remembering April with moving forward, ensuring the town wouldn't be defined solely by tragedy. Economic impacts were a concern, as some feared tourism would decline due to the town's association with April's murder. Initially, visitor numbers did drop, but over time, most tourists returned, drawn by the area's natural beauty and history. The town worked to maintain its identity as a welcoming, vibrant community while appropriately memorializing April. Residents have described a lasting change in the community's atmosphere. The easy trust and sense of safety that once characterized Mackinac have been tempered by awareness of danger. Parents are more protective. Children are given less unsupervised freedom. Neighbors watch each other more carefully, both for protection and sometimes with suspicion. This loss of innocence is perhaps inevitable after such a crime, but it represents a real cost to the community. The ability to let children play freely without constant worry, to trust neighbors automatically, to feel secure in a small town setting, these things were damaged by Bridger's actions. Rebuilding that sense of community while maintaining appropriate vigilance has been challenging. Younger residents who have grown up after April's disappearance know the story as history rather than lived experience. For them, April is a memorial statue, an annual ceremony, a name they've heard their entire lives. They learn about her in school and understand that she's an important part of their community's story, but they don't carry the same visceral memories as those who lived through October 2012. This generational shift is natural and in some ways healthy, allowing the community to gradually process and integrate the tragedy into its history rather than remaining frozen in crisis. But it also risks April's story becoming abstract or being forgotten entirely. The memorial events and ongoing education ensure that each generation learns about April and why her memory matters. The Jones family's relationships with Mackinac are complex. The town is their home, where April was born and where she lived her short life. It's where they feel closest to her. But it's also where she was taken from them, where every street and landmark holds painful memories. They've chosen to stay, maintaining their connection to April's community, but it hasn't been easy. Coral has described seeing children April's age and older, watching them grow and achieve milestones April will never reach. Every birthday, every first day of school, every graduation that April's classmates experience is a reminder of what she missed. The Jones family lives surrounded by constant reminders of both April's life and her absence. Yet they've found strength in the community's support and in keeping April's memory alive through the Memorial Fund and other activities. They've built meaningful relationships with others who've lost children, finding solidarity in shared grief. They've discovered reserves of resilience they never knew they had, surviving what they once would have thought unsurvivable. Their surviving children, Jasmine and Harley, have grown into adults while carrying the weight of their sister's loss. Both have spoken about the difficulty of being known primarily in relation to April rather than for their own identities and accomplishments. They love their sister and honor her memory, but they also need to live their own lives. The Jones family dynamics have inevitably been shaped by grief. Relationships that might have developed differently if April had lived have instead been forged in shared trauma. The family has had to actively work to maintain connections and support each other through waves of grief that hit different family members at different times. Grief counseling and family therapy have been essential resources. Extended family members, including April's grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins, have also struggled with loss and with supporting Coral and Paul. The ripple effects of April's murder extended through multiple generations and relationships, affecting dozens of people directly and countless others indirectly. Every family gathering is marked by April's absence. Friends of the Jones family have described feeling helpless in the face of such overwhelming grief. What do you say to parents whose child was murdered? How do you support someone through decades of unresolved loss? Many relationships strained or ended because people didn't know how to maintain connections across such a divide of experience. But others deepened as friends showed up consistently over years, offering practical support and silent presence. The professional support available to families like the Jones has improved partly due to increased awareness from high-profile cases. Victim support services, trauma counseling, and peer support groups for bereaved parents have all expanded. While nothing can fix what happened, these services help families develop coping strategies and find ways to continue living. April's case highlighted gaps in support services that have been partially addressed. Families of missing persons, particularly those whose loved ones are never found, face unique challenges that traditional grief counseling doesn't always address. Specialized services for ambiguous loss have been developed, helping families cope with not knowing and with the absence of closure that a body and funeral provide. Legal support for victims' families has also improved, with better communication between prosecutors and families, more opportunities for family input in proceedings, and stronger support through the trial process. The Jones family's experience helped identify areas where the system could be more responsive to families' needs while maintaining legal integrity. Financial support for families of murder victims has been another area of improvement. The costs associated with a child's murder, including funeral arrangements or lack thereof, lost work time, counseling, and travel to court proceedings, can be overwhelming. Victim compensation funds have been strengthened, though many argue they still don't adequately address families' needs. The Jones family has been relatively privileged in having access to resources and support that not all families receive. Their case's high profile brought assistance and donations that less publicized cases might not generate. They've used their platform to advocate for all families affected by crime, regardless of whether their cases receive media attention. As we approach the end of this examination of April Jones' case, we must acknowledge that some questions will never be answered. We'll likely never know exactly what happened in Bridger's cottage on October 1, 2012. We'll probably never find April's remains. We'll never fully understand what motivated Bridger or whether anything could have definitively prevented his actions. These unanswered questions are part of what makes April's case so haunting. The not knowing, the gaps in the narrative, the final cruelty of Bridger's refusal to disclose where April is, all of this compounds the tragedy. For the Jones family, living with unanswered questions is an ongoing source of pain. But some things we do know with certainty. We know that April was a loved and cherished child who brought joy to her family and community. We know that her death was not an accident but a deliberate act of evil. We know that justice was served in convicting and imprisoning her killer. We know that her loss has motivated positive changes in child protection. We know that her memory continues to inspire compassion and action. We also know that despite unimaginable grief, the Jones family has survived and found ways to honor April while continuing to live. We know that the community of Mackinac came together in crisis and has worked to heal while remembering. We know that thousands of people who never met April have been moved by her story and motivated to protect children in their own communities. April's story is ultimately about more than her tragic death. It's about the preciousness of childhood and the collective responsibility to protect it. It's about the resilience of families and communities in the face of horror. It's about the importance of vigilance, awareness, and action in preventing harm to children. It's about the lasting impact one small life can have on the world. For those of us learning about April's case, whether for the first time or revisiting it years later, we have obligations. We have an obligation to remember April as a complete person, not just a victim. We have an obligation to support efforts to protect children in our own communities. We have an obligation to be vigilant without being paranoid, protective without being suffocating, aware without being fearful. We also have an obligation to support families like the Jones who have suffered unimaginable losses. This support can take many forms: donations to memorial funds, participation in awareness campaigns, advocating for policy changes, or simply treating their stories with respect and sensitivity rather than as entertainment. April Jones was born on April 4, 2007. She disappeared on October 1, 2012. She was 5 years old. These are the basic facts of her case, the dates and numbers that summarize a tragedy. But April was so much more than these facts suggest. She was a fighter who overcame medical challenges. She was a little girl who loved pink and princesses. She was a daughter, sister, granddaughter, niece, friend, and student. She had hopes and dreams that were stolen from her. She had a future that should have included growing up, going to secondary school, perhaps attending university, falling in love, building a career, maybe having children of her own. All of that was taken from April and from everyone who loved her. Mark Bridger's evil actions didn't just end one life. They damaged countless others, created ripples of pain that spread through families and communities, and left wounds that will never fully heal. But April's story doesn't end with her death. It continues in the pink ribbons that appear each October in Mackinac. It continues in the memorial fund that bears her name and helps other children. It continues in the stronger laws and better protections that exist partly because of awareness raised by her case. It continues in the hearts of everyone who remembers her and works to honor her memory. The Jones family's journey through grief continues as well. More than a decade after losing April, they still face each day with her absence. They've learned to live with grief rather than overcome it, to carry April's memory while continuing to function. They've shown remarkable strength, but they would give anything to have never needed to develop that strength. Their message to others who face similar tragedies is one of solidarity and hope. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes manageable. The grief doesn't end, but it transforms. Life continues, even when it seems impossible. And meaning can be found, even in the darkest circumstances, through honoring those we've lost and working to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. Thank you for staying with us through this comprehensive examination of April Jones' case. This has been a difficult story to tell and undoubtedly a difficult story to hear. If you've made it to this point, you've shown real commitment to understanding this case and honoring April's memory. Now, here's what I need you to do. First, hit that subscribe button right now for Cold Case Crimelab. We're committed to bringing you detailed, respectful coverage of cases that matter, cases that changed laws, changed communities, and should never be forgotten. Second, give this video a like. It helps us reach more people and ensures that stories like April's continue to be told. Third, and most importantly, I want you to leave a comment below. Tell us how this case affected you. Share your thoughts on what more can be done to protect children. Let us know if there's someone in your life you need to hug a little tighter tonight after hearing April's story. Your engagement keeps this channel going and keeps cases like April's in the public consciousness where they belong. And if you haven't already, please consider donating to child safety organizations in your area or to the April Jones Memorial Fund. Turn the awareness you've gained from this video into action. That's how we honor April's memory and protect other children. April Jones should be 18 years old as I record this. She should be finishing secondary school, thinking about her future, experiencing all the joys and challenges of adolescence. Instead, she remains forever 5 years old, frozen in time in photographs and memories. That injustice can never be corrected, but we can ensure she's never forgotten and that her death continues to motivate positive change. To the Jones family, if you ever see this, please know that millions of people around the world continue to remember April and hold you in their thoughts. Your strength has inspired countless others. Your work to protect children in April's name has made a real difference. And your refusal to let grief destroy you demonstrates the resilience of love and the power of a parent's devotion. To the community of Mackinac, thank you for never forgetting one of your own. The pink ribbons, the memorial garden, the annual ceremonies, all of these show a community's commitment to honoring April appropriately. You've demonstrated how communities can heal while remembering, can move forward while looking back, can reclaim normalcy while never forgetting tragedy. To everyone who searched for April in those desperate October days of 2012, your efforts mattered. Even though April wasn't found, your willingness to help, your dedication, and your compassion represented humanity at its best, responding to humanity at its worst. The Jones family has expressed their enduring gratitude for your efforts. To the police officers, forensic specialists, prosecutors, and all the professionals who worked on April's case, your dedication to justice and your meticulous work ensured that Mark Bridger was held accountable. Your efforts provided some measure of justice for April and her family, even though the outcome was not what anyone hoped for. This is Cold Case Crimelab, reminding you that behind every case, there's a real person who mattered, a family that grieves, and a community that remembers. April Jones was here. She lived, she mattered, and she will never be forgotten. Thank you for helping us keep her memory alive. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and hold your loved ones close.